Hey everyone, we're back with episode 3, which is, well, part 2 of a discussion we started in episode 2. We are going to continue talking about the patchy rock record in this one. Last time we focused on why the rock record is patchy, why it has gaps in general, and this time we're then going to proceed and going to focus on paleontology after having a look into the planetary sciences side of things last time. So today we're recording on the 25th of November 2020. We would once again like to start with a bit of news. We have now decided on a fixed schedule for this podcast. We are going to try and release an episode all 2 weeks. We have stated this last time already. We cannot guarantee that this will work all the time, especially because we're both still students. We both still have to deal with exams and with final reports and stuff. So sometimes this might be an issue, but in general, this is the schedule for the future. And once again, we would like to start with a bit of news from, well, us and the world of geology.
Yeah. Do you want to start this time?
Yeah, I think would be a pretty good idea, because this time it's pretty much roles reversed from the last time. This time I don't really have too much to say, but you do.
Yeah.
So I have started another project with another bachelor student concerning a trackway from the Vian Mountains, from the Upper Jurassic of the Vian Mountains. And I think it's a bit too early once again to talk about what we've got there. But yeah, project number 3 in the making. Otherwise, work on the museum collection continues. And that's pretty much it. Nothing truly special happened over the past 2 weeks.
Very boring life.
Very boring life. I hope that I can tell some more spectacular things next time, maybe. Or at least over the next few episodes. There's one thing from the world of paleontology I would like to touch on, which concerns a very, very special fossil. It concerns the so-called dueling dinosaurs, which is a fossil consisting of 2 skeletons of 2 dinosaurs. One is a ceratopsian, a triceratops skeleton, and the other one is a tyrannosaurid, likely a juvenile Tyrannosaurus. This is at least what most people say currently. These 2 skeletons are very, very well preserved. The Tyrannosaurus is pretty much complete. I don't know exactly how complete the ceratopsian is, but at least pretty complete as well. And they have been found associated with one another, which is pretty special. They're pretty complete and they've been found right next to each other. This is why the name dueling dinosaurs was proposed, or why it is the general term everyone uses when talking about these 2 fossils. Actually, nobody knows whether they look amazing. It's really just, if you haven't seen it before, look it up. Even if you're not too much into paleontology, go and look it up. It's awesome. It's a brilliant piece. And actually, there hasn't really been any scientific work done on it. This thing has been known since, I think, about 2006 when it was discovered, but it was discovered by commercial fossil hunters. So the problem is when something is in private hands and not in the hands of a museum, for instance, that you cannot guarantee that this fossil will be available for further research in the future after describing it. And this is why it's a problem, or at least it's a point of discussion in paleontology, whether you should publish material in private hands. But then furthermore, over the next years, after finding this piece, several legal issues concerned these fossils. Several different legal problems arose. It's been a back and forth, and now finally this piece has been bought, and it is going to be housed in the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. So pretty special, because now it's safe. Now it's in an official institution where it is also going to be on display. And it finally, at long last, scientists can work on these dinosaurs. Try to figure out whether they actually dueled or they were just coincidentally preserved together.
I actually didn't know about it, that there were these legal cases before.
Yeah, I don't really know the details, but it was mentioned that there were legal troubles. So, then, I am going to throw the ball over to you, and I'm just going to let you talk for the next half an hour, I think.
I hope it will not be that long. So the last time we recorded a podcast is actually now 3 or 4 weeks. I think it was 3 or 4 weeks ago. So, yeah, quite some time passed. So since then, I've now submitted my bachelor thesis. Pretty amazing feeling. I don't know. I mean, I'm pretty happy about it, and I think the first time I hold it in my hands and saw like how nice it looked, it was an amazing feeling, and I think from that point on, I just was. I mean, maybe not 100% convinced, but I just was happy about it. Before, there were always these minor things in my mind that I am like unhappy about it, or like, why is that way? There's actually one minor mistake that I don't know why it's there, but there's one minor mistake. And I actually wrote a kind of angry email to my professor at the day that I've submitted it to the printery. And I was like, no, how could that happen? Yeah. But
so maybe to add to that, you said that it was a problem of the software, I think.
Yes, I used manually for citation, and I kind of changed the citation style within the writing process, and so there occurred a mistake that I've looked at it 1,000 times, but I just overlooked it again and again. And I thought I fixed it, but I didn't. I mean, it's not that big, it's minor. But, so first of all, this just was in my head all the time. But I think the first time that I hold it in my hands, everything was fine. The like main point, or the main building of our university is in it's not a castle, what is it? Palace, I guess palace, you can say palace, of our city. So like the center of the city, and there's the main building of our university. And there's also the mailbox where we have to submit the bachelor thesis or all the things in. And just the feeling of going there, walking like this long street to the palace, listening to music, and then throwing in the thesis, felt like the end of a TV show season. Last episode. I had the feeling twice, because I wanted to throw it in the morning, and then I realized that my envelope is too small.
Oh dear.
So I had to buy a new envelope, and then I throw it in later in the afternoon again.
As long as it worked out in the end.
Yeah. So it's finished yet. Still, work is progressing in that regard, or in that topic. We will write a paper about it. This is like my next step I'm going to do. And yeah, I think I can start working on that during the next weeks. So this will be also, I think, a great experience. The first time really trying to write on paper. Alright, I guess that's about my personal news. And now I kind of want to change to a different subject before we will go into our main segment of today. And I want to talk about the Chang'e 5 mission. And I hope I'm pronouncing that correct. All the Chinese names in here. So the Chang'e 5 mission launched now on November 23rd. So 2 days ago already. Did you watch the launch?
Oh, no, I didn't. I missed it, unfortunately.
I too. I thought it was on 24th, because if you read like old newspapers or articles about it, it says 24th, and I was so concentrated on 24th, and then on 24th in the morning, I just learned that it already launched. So that was kind of sad. Yeah. Anyway, so what I want to do is kind of giving a quick introduction into the mission. So what is the mission profile, and then what are the science objectives about the topic. I think this will take like 10 minutes, I hope. So let's get into that. The Chang'e 5 mission is part of the China's lunar exploration program. So in this program, we already had Chang'e 1 and 2. These were 2 orbital missions. Then we had Chang'e 3 and 4, which did soft land and also include a rover. Chang'e 4 is therefore famous because it was the first ever spacecraft to land on the far side of the moon. Then now we have Chang'e 5, which is the first sample return mission of the Chinese. And then we have some future phases. We have Chang'e 6 and 7 that will focus on the lunar South Pole. They will look for landing sites for possible crewed missions in the future. They will look at resources, different science objectives. They will include orbiter, lander, even a rover, and a sample return again for a mission, I think Chang'e 6. So this will then our first samples of the lunar South Pole. So these are 2 very incredible missions in the next years. Then we will have Chang'e 8, which will focus on testing technologies for the following crewed missions and lunar habitats. And then we will have crewed missions with a question mark, kind of like in the 2030s, I guess. Chang'e 8 is, I think, scheduled for 27. I think, or 24, no, 27. So yeah, and then the crewed missions will follow some time after that. Yeah, so why is Chang'e 5 so special? It will give us our first samples of the moon for more than 40 years now. The last time we actually get back samples from the moon is now 40 years ago. And with that, China will become the next country next to the Soviet Union and the US to get back lunar samples.
Which is pretty cool in and of itself.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's why this project is so special for me, because it's the first time in my life that I'm experiencing that we get back lunar samples.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is quite cool. So yeah, it consists of a service module that will boost the Chang'e 5 mission to the moon and then back again. We have a lander, which is the lander of the same lander as the missions before, so the same design. So this is quite efficient. There's then the ascent unit, which will bring back the samples from the lunar surface. And we have the return vehicle, which will then enter the Earth's atmosphere again, re-entry at the end of the mission. Yeah, so it launched 23rd November. The trip to the moon will take 4 days. This is quite fast. because it's on direct trajectory. It moves to the moon directly, not going into Earth's orbit first. It will then reach an orbit of the moon of a height of 200 kilometers. And then it will, and we don't know exactly when, but we know that at the start of a lunar day, and lunar day is about 14 Earth days long. So at the start of a lunar day, the lander will then attempt to land. Kind of the process behind that is that of a height of above 100 meters above the surface, the lander will then hover and like search for obstacles and search for a safe landing spot. It will then land and it will stay on the surface, or it will take samples on the surface within one lunar day. So it will 14 days it will stay on the surface. They don't want to go into the lunar night because then it's getting really cold and then it's quite difficult to keep your spacecraft alive. Yeah, so on the surface they can take several samples because they can separate the samples. They will take samples by scooping, so just surface samples. And they also have a drill that can drill up to a depth of 2 meters. In total, they can have samples of a weight of 2 kilograms. Yeah, these samples will then be transferred into the ascent unit, which will then launch again from the moon and rendezvous with the service module and the return vehicle. It will then move back. This will take 5 days to move back to the Earth, where we will then get our samples. The landing module will then re-enter the atmosphere and land with parachutes. So we will then get back our samples. So the duration time can be as short as 23 days, actually, which means that we could have lunar samples again as early as December 16th or December 17th. This is quite astonishing short time.
Yeah, that's pretty quick. That's pretty quick. I mean, I don't know. Of course, not following all of this as closely as you are, but I didn't expect that we would have it before the end of the year.
Yeah, this was also very surprising to me. I mean, I'm saying here as short as and things like that because the Chinese mission profiles are not that open as, for example, an European space mission or an American space mission. Mm-hmm. So we kind of have to guess sometimes. But it could be as short as 23 days. It depends on when they will land. So how long they will stay in orbit.
Yeah, of course.
And yeah, it depends on that time. And I don't have information on that time. It just says that it's as early as the next day, the start of a new day. So yeah, maybe now a short introduction or a quick introduction to the science objectives. The landing will take place in the northern region of Oceanus Procellarum. This is a large mare region on the moon. So mare are the dark spots we see on the moon. These are basalt regions. It will take in the northern region. Oceanus Procellarum is, I think the largest. Should be the largest mare that we have. And the landing site is near Mons Rümker, which is kind of a volcanic complex on the moon that is unexplored. Looks pretty cool if you want to look that up. And the interesting thing about that region is that there is material, but there are basalts that are, one of the youngest basalts that we have on the moon. Large scale volcanic basalts that we have on the moon. We talk about ages from 1.3 to 1.2 billion years. So this is very young. Most of the basalts have ages above 3 billion years or 2 billion years. And this will be definitely the youngest rocks that we have studied yet from the moon. That makes this mission quite interesting because we still kind of don't know why these basalts are that young. There are some theories. Procellarum et al. Is younger than other maria. And we know that there's the creep terror, which is basalts that are very rich of potassium, rare earth elements, phosphorus, and radioactive elements such as thorium or uranium. And maybe the radioactivity kept the basalts or kept the material warmer for a longer period of time, and therefore we could have late stage volcanic activity. However, these are all theories, so therefore the mission is just important on a geochemical level, also volcanic processes, and also trying to figure out the moon's history. And that's just why
it goes back to episode 2 a little bit.
Yeah, it actually does.
Yeah.
Also, in episode 2, I talked about crater counting and how we can date surfaces of different planets with crater counting, and we actually can then derive exact ages of these new rocks, and then we can kind of try to calibrate again our crater counting methods to see like if in this area is our crater counting correct, yes or no, and then we can kind of calibrate it again. And then many various other reasons. I mean, we can study moon rocks again. We don't have that much, so it's always amazing. Yeah, and then what will happen after the landing? Well, it's kind of unclear if the samples are shared. As if, like every Chinese mission, it's kind of difficult to get the information, and it's always difficult to I think to work together with them. It's got better, definitely got better, but it's still difficult. There are discussions with the European Space Agency because the European Space Agency is involved in the mission. They will take care of the deep space network, so the connection to the spacecraft. And therefore there's a discussion about sharing of the material of the samples, but there is no agreement yet, so we have to wait for that. However, if everything works correctly, this is a very successful mission, then it's just amazing. We have new samples again from a previously unexplored region. A lot of science can come out of this. And also for the Chinese, it will probably be an incredible large success. I have a reference here from Long Xiao, who is part of the China University of Geoscience, and he just said, "We will have new and our own lunar samples to study. It will inspire young students and scientists to engage in planetary science and exploration." Yeah, for sure, they will have a large success out of that. It will be a large step in their already very successful lunar program. So yeah, if you want to read more into the topic, there is some reference I can give. You can go to spaceflight101.com. They give you a detailed description of the things that we know about the mission profile and about the technical background on that mission. There are also 2 good articles in Nature and National Geographic where they kind of summarize the scientific objectives. In the Nature article, actually my professor is referenced, Dr. Ari Hiesinger, and also Dr. Carolyn van der Bogert. And in the National Geographic article, James Head is referenced, who is a very, very famous planetary scientist who was also involved in the Apollo missions back then. There are some maps from the European Space Agency, which show the trajectories of the mission. These are also quite interesting. And for the German viewers, there's a Spectrum article about it, which is also, I kind of read through it. I also found it very interesting. So these are kind of references where you can get maybe more details from the mission. Yeah, so I wanted to talk about that because it's very important topic for me, and I think a very important topic for geoscience in general.
Definitely. I mean, having a piece of moon rock down here, lunar rock down here on Earth this is definitely something special.
Yeah,
and
we will go back.
Yeah, I mean, do you remember once we were at the museum, at the Natural History Museum here in Münster? At the planetarium, I think. Is it planetarium in English?
I think so, yeah.
Or your professor, he held a talk there, and afterwards we got to see a piece of lunar rock. And I remember this being pretty moving, because just thinking about this piece of rock actually coming from the moon, having traveled all the way to here, I think it was it an asteroid? Oh, yeah, I don't know my terminology there, but was it an asteroid? It was a
moon meteorite.
Meteorite.
Yeah. Oh, it's a meteorite.
Okay. But this is, I mean, just having something to give people to look at, it always leaves a deeper impression than just talking about it. So this is definitely a big thing. And yeah, I'm really, really looking forward to the results and to having some new samples down here.
Yeah, I think I've already saw 2 original lunar rocks from the Apollo missions. So there's one in Speyer, so it's a Technikmuseum here in Germany, and they have like a large space-centered part in the museum, and there is like a large Apollo 17 sample, and then very funnily, very near in where I come from, there's this large crater in Nördlinger Ries, which I also talked about in the last episode. And for the Apollo missions, the astronauts trained there.
Oh.
And they gave them, there's a very, very small, very small museum. Yeah, and then actually they got a small rock and smaller moon rock.
That's pretty cool.
So yeah, that's also pretty cool.
Yeah. So, do you have anything to add?
No, I don't think so.
All right, then let's hit the break, and then we'll be right back with the main part.
So the last time we talked about what problems geologists have to face when they try to reconstruct the geological history. And therefore we first of all talked about why this rock archive that we're working on is actually incomplete or patchy in the first place. So what processes are behind that led to this incomplete archive. We talked about plate tectonics, we talked about erosion, and then we, or mainly I, talked about how planetary scientists encounter this problem, and how we work on this problem on different planets and on our moon, and how the archive is there different than on our Earth. And yeah, this took quite some time, and that's why we decided to do a second episode where mainly Denis today will talk about paleontology and how they encountered this problem, and then we will kind of put everything together and try to do an end discussion today. So this is the plan for today's second episode to that topic. But before we start and before I let Denis talk, there are 2 things that I wanted to address from the last episode that I have to clarify. So first of all, I said the Serkin Hill Serkins. Of course, these are the Czech Hill Serkins, not the Serkin Hill Serkins.
Of course, the ones everyone knows.
Yeah.
Everyone, even the people not studying geology. Everyone.
I doubt that. Just everyone, yeah. It's standard talk to learn this in like elementary school now.
Yeah, right. That's what I was gonna say. Just basic elementary school stuff.
Yeah, so this is Jackson Hill, or Czech Hills, not Serkin Hills.
Don't screw it up a second time.
Yeah. Man. Alright. Then the second thing, and yeah, we talked about geochronology the last time, or especially about isotope dating of minerals and how a metamorphism can influence this dating. And well, there is stated that like after metamorphism, we are not able to derive the original formation age of the mineral. And this is only kind of true. Because there is actually one method that, at least that I'm aware of, with isotope dating, where we still have the ability to derive the original formation age. And this is with uranium and lead. So, uranium decays into lead, or better said, very specific uranium isotopes decay into very specific lead isotopes. And if we then, for example, look at a zircon, when a zircon forms, lead is not built in the original structure. So we can say that the original, like the initial lead abundance in a zircon is near zero. However, uranium is built in this structure. So if we look now at a zircon today, and we look at this ratio of this very specific lead or very specific uranium isotopes, then we can say how much time has passed to get to this ratio that we have today. Because we know the decay rate of uranium into lead. Like, this is the basic theory behind isotope dating in general, but now explained with uranium and lead. And with uranium lead, maybe in general, first of all, if there's a metamorphism, what happens is that the zircon gets heated. And this results in a loss of lead, because now lead can again escape the mineral structure of zircon. So the ratio is altered. And that's why we have problems reconstructing or deriving the oldest age, so the formation age, because this ratio is altered. However, this altered ratio is variable. So if we look at different zircons in this rock complex or in this rock, then we see different ratios because there are variable losses of lead. And with that, we can actually then again extrapolate to the original or initial ratio. And with that, we can again get the information of the, or at least like an minimum age of the formation. But if there's a second event, like a second metamorphism or any other event that would lead to a loss of lead, for example, wettering, then it's gone. Then nada. Then we can't derive the formation age with this method. So it only works with one event. Then we can go back. But if there's a second event, this information is lost. Because then it's altered second times, 2 times it's altered, and then it's just a mess. But it's like this one ability to do this again with uranium and lead if you have one metamorphism event. And to add to that, I then stated that after metamorphism you are only able to derive the age of the metamorphism. But also this is not really correct, because it is not necessarily, you're not necessarily able then to derive the metamorphism age. Because as I said, this is a variable loss of lead for in the case of uranium and lead. With that, it's just a mess. You can't derive the age of the metamorphism with that data. So you are not necessarily able then to derive the age of the metamorphism. So these are just 2 things that I wanted to kind of clarify in this discussion about isotope dating.
Yeah, we thought we should start with the light stuff, the easy digestible stuff.
I hope it was the problem is that isotope dating is a very difficult topic, very interesting, but also very complicated. And I wanted to talk about it in a later podcast, because trying to explain it in detail would take really long time.
Yeah.
So I kind of rushed through it the last time. Yeah, but by rushing through it, I wasn't too clear at some points.
Yeah. I mean, isotopes are a very, very useful tool in all kinds of disciplines, in paleontology as well. And I hope we can dedicate some future episodes to that. Would be pretty interesting to see what we can do with isotopes, maybe.
Definitely.
Yeah, like a general overview. What can we do with it? What are the potential pitfalls of different methods, different usages?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good idea. So,
all right.
Now that now that I clarified my points from the last time, I would just, I don't know, throw the ball to you, and now you can talk.
Yeah, all right. I've got some coffee made from freshly ground beans over here.
I have a ginger beer.
Yeah. All right then.
Yeah. And without alcohol. I'm not drinking alcohol like in the week.
You can tell me what it tasted like. I mean,
very
good
gingery.
or bad. Very gingery, yeah. You can tell me whether you liked it
ginger
afterwards.
Yeah, I will.
So this episode is going to be centered around paleontology, and paleontology is pretty special when it comes to, what we have preserved and what might be missing. Paleontology comes with its very own set of factors preventing us from having a totally clear view of everything that has ever existed. The general example everybody points to is that it's pretty advantageous to have hard parts, to have bones, to have a shell, because these components already consist of minerals for the most part. There is a large organic part in these structures, but they do have a certain amount of minerals already, and they tend to fossilize pretty well, at least compared to soft parts, organic components. Because organic components, well, they decompose as soon as an animal dies, or any kind of creature dies. Yeah, or plants. All kinds of, living things, when they die, they start to decompose. And mostly what remains are hard parts, resistant parts, because that's not entirely true, because there are certain materials, organic materials, which can stand the test of time very, very well, like, sporopollenin, the components making up spores, spore walls from plants and fungi.
Totally knew that.
Yeah, of course you did. No, just kidding, of course. So, this is generally the thing we have to keep in mind. We have to think of we have to think of the fossil record to be incomplete. Only, basically already, because not everything tends to fossilize well. This doesn't mean that everything in terms of soft structures, organic soft structures, is completely missing, because it is possible for soft tissues to preserve, but then we're mostly talking about imprints on the sediment. There are, for instance, dinosaur skin imprints, some from T-Rex, for instance, some from big sauropods, so the big long-necked dinosaurs, the cliche dinosaur everybody thinks of.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there are. I only learned that pretty recently, but there are. From ceratopsians, so Triceratops and colleagues. Actually, I was pretty surprised. There are skin impressions of a lot of different dinosaur groups.
And also feathers.
Feathers, yeah, of course. That's another example, which might be more familiar to at least the more paleontology interested people. There are feather imprints. The probably most well-known example is the first bird, Archaeopteryx, from the Solnhofen limestone of Germany. That's a funny thing, every time I speak English, I just start pronouncing things as if I didn't know how to speak German. Solnhofen. Solnhofen. Does that count as the German word of the day?
Nah. We'll find some better.
We can do better.
Yeah.
So, continuing along this path.
Wait, you did see Archaeopteryx 2 in Berlin, right?
Oh yeah, I did.
Yeah.
When I was there about 2 years ago, I think.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I saw it this August. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I mean, there are 13 Archaeopteryxes out there.
13 complete or like?
Nah, some only have some bones preserved, but overall. Funny little side story maybe. We can decide whether we'll cut this out later on because of time constraints, but actually the name Archaeopteryx was the name of one single isolated feather. And later on, when the body fossil was discovered, this animal was assigned to the same genus as the feather. Yeah, because a few weeks back, a paper came out where they tried to reassess whether this feather could have actually come from what we today know as Archaeopteryx. Their conclusion was that it was pretty likely that it came from them, as far as I remember. But, of course, they don't exclude that some other pretty similar bird or bird-like dinosaur, dromaeosaur, or anything like that could have been around. Just a little side story.
So, what would happen if they would find out that this feather did not be like the feather of Archaeopteryx? So, would then be the name changed of the dinosaur?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much an issue of nomenclature. So,
yeah.
If you would be really, really strict about it, yes. The feather had the name first, and there is the law of priority, so the thing that was named first retains the name. Theoretically, yeah, you would have to rename Archaeopteryx, the bird Archaeopteryx. But their exceptions have been made. T-Rex is the most famous example. Maybe I'll just write that down because I don't know off the top of my head which exact name it was. I think it was Mesospondylus. There were isolated T-Rex, or was it Mesospondylus? No, I don't know exactly. But isolated teeth that were later reassigned to T-Rex had been named Mesospondylus. If this actually was the name, I'm gonna add that in the news section of the next episode. Then we would theoretically have to rename T-Rex, because the teeth belonging to this animal were named first. But in that case, an exception was made because by that point, when this became pretty clear, this name of Tyrannosaurus Rex had been too well established in pop culture, and I think it was pretty fitting to make an exception right there.
Yeah.
So
definitely. The other name, I already forgot it. Yeah, never mind. Sorry.
I'm not going to repeat it because I don't know whether I was right about that. I mean, it's a shame. I should know that, but...
Definitely should know that, yeah.
Oh, I'm better with pterosaurs anyway, so... Maybe you could use that as an excuse, but...
Yeah, I take it.
Returning to the main topic. We have now established that preservation is a pretty two-edged sword. Some animals preserve well, some to a lesser degree, and some, well, if you only have soft tissues, there's a pretty high possibility you won't preserve. And while there are these exceptions, there are even additional factors which could potentially prevent you from entering the fossil record. Just imagine a dinosaur population, for instance, because what other examples would I come up with? Dinosaurs. Just imagine a very small island out on the ocean. And if you have listened to our previous episode, the oceanic crust tends to be recycled a lot more often than the continental crust. It would be possible that the small dinosaur population, this small island where very, very special creatures evolved, would be completely destroyed because of its size, because it has been part of the oceanic crust, because many oceanic islands, for instance, in the middle of the Pacific, they are created by oceanic volcanism. They are part of the oceanic crust. So,
and they also decay really fast. So if you look, for example, at the Hawaiian Islands.
Exactly. They decay pretty quickly, I mean, in geological terms. It would be pretty possible for these animals to never enter the fossil record. Also, imagine animals living up in the mountains. We have addressed in the previous episode as well that mountains are subject to erosion. And animals dying somewhere in between very high-rising mountains. Think of goats living in the mountains today, for instance. It would be possible that even those animals being preserved in a lake deposit or something like that would just be completely annihilated throughout the erosion of these mountains. And that's the important thing. You need an area where, mostly you need areas where there is water, because many areas with water tend to catch sediment. Think of rivers transporting sediment from mountains towards lakes, towards the ocean in the end. You need some kind of sediment catcher. Rivers can also catch sediment. I mean, they transport it primarily, but they can catch it as well. Think of meandering, very, very slowly flowing rivers. And if an animal gets caught in this kind of basin, in this kind of sediment catcher, it can be slowly covered with sediment, or in the most ideal case, very quickly be covered with sediment. This can be the case in such, slowly flowing rivers. This can be the case in lakes or in marine deposits, as long as they are part of the continental crust. Because, remember, continental crust preserves longer than oceanic crust. And the
also,
parts...
oceanic crust is really dewy, so difficult to study.
Exactly. It's difficult to study, so even the oceanic crust still present it would be difficult to look for fossils down there. I mean, there are about 2 kilometers on average of water column in the way. And these are depths which are already pretty hostile. It's pretty special to get down there anyway. So to talk a bit about an example I'm pretty familiar with, the Jurassic deposits, shallow marine deposits of Germany. Terrestrial animals can be preserved in these shallow marine deposits here in Germany because in the Mesozoic, the sea levels were way higher than they are today. Most of Europe was covered underwater. This is called an epicontinental sea. And this is exactly what we had back then. Only a few rises, continental rises, highlands, were above water. One example being the Rhenish Massif. And when an animal dies at a beach or is transported towards the sea via a river, for instance, it can be flushed out to sea. And this is how terrestrial animals can be preserved along the sediment transported towards the sea in marine deposits. So what I hope I have established now is preservation of living things is difficult. We do have a discrepancy because of these effects between what should be there and what actually is there. So most animals or most creatures in general we have preserved are the ones with hard parts. We have the most fossils of vertebrates, of mollusks, because mollusks, as in, for instance, snails, they produce hard parts, clams. While today we see an inverse picture. Insects, for example, they are everywhere. And they make up certainly the most amount of biodiversity we have in terms of terrestrial animals. So it's pretty important to keep in mind that when we look at the fossil record, we have to interpret it knowing why we do see such an inverse picture. This doesn't mean that animals like insects, they cannot preserve, but it's more rare. They can preserve as impressions or in amber. Amber is a very well-known example. But we need to keep this in mind. This is very important. And speaking of trying to differentiate between things that actually were there and were not, I would like to transition into my main topic for this section, because it's a very good example of how difficult it can be to truly assess the presence or absence of something in the fossil record. And for this, I would like to talk about the so-called phytoplankton blackout, which is a pretty eerie name, to say the least.
Yeah.
But
sounds like a computer game. Call of Duty, the phytoplankton blackout. Sorry.
Yeah, well, I think it doesn't seem as impressive as you think it sounds. At least it sounds catastrophic. And so what this term phytoplankton blackout refers to is that at the end of the Devonian, the until then dominant phytoplankton groups went extinct, or at least seemed to disappear. Until then, you had this dominant planktonic group called the acritarchs, and acritarchs are likely an artificial group. Artificial in this case meaning a group we tend to refer to as a collective. So, we talk about acrotarchs when addressing all these kinds of different cysts we find in Paleozoic sedimentary rocks. But it's likely that they are not a natural group. So scientists are aware of that. But because it's pretty difficult to truly determine their relationships among each other, they are referred to as this whole group. They do form cysts. Why do they do that? It's known from other extant plankton groups, and some do this to reproduce. Some do this basically under bad conditions. So if the environment doesn't allow them to flourish, they do form the cyst, and then they can just lie dormant until conditions suitable for them, re-arise.
So these cysts are like capsules where they live in then, or they wait in?
Exactly. They just lie dormant. So they kind of winter sleep, if you would. Mm-hmm. They just wait until better times arise. And what happens is that these cysts, which are made up of sporopollenin, which we have already talked about as being a very, very resistant and preservable material, they are preserved in between sedimentary grains, sand grains, for instance, in marine rocks. And once again, what comes into play here is that we tended to have high sea levels in Earth's past, which we also had in the Paleozoic, which we also had here. Many parts of continental crust, which are truly terrestrial today, were flooded back then. So we have these marine deposits on continental crust, which is where we can still observe these changes in planktonic groups, where we can analyze these present planktonic groups, which would, once again, be pretty difficult to know about, to study, if we try to do this with marine crust, because it's gone. It's mostly gone. And what we see then is that these acrotarchs go extinct along a major extinction event at the end of the Devonian. At the end of the Devonian, there were changes on Earth. Climate changed. It's a cocktail of different things going wrong. It's still being discussed what exactly led up to this major extinction event, which affected all kinds of groups globally. But something changed in terms of planktonic groups, because the acrotarchs got hit really bad. Really, really, really bad. Because, they didn't really go fully extinct, because they seemingly do show up every now and again after that. But there is a very, very scary border. Above the Devonian, after the Devonian, there is definitely something different going on, because it's difficult to find plankton all the way until way into the Triassic. And in the Triassic then, all of a sudden, modern groups still present today show up. Dinoflagellates show up, which is another group of algae which form cysts, just as acrotarchs do. There has been this line of thought that they might have descended from acrotarchs. I don't really know where the consensus is on that. I do still remember that at least our palynology... Yeah, in palynology, I think we discussed that they likely aren't descended from them, but I would have to look up why exactly that is. But they do also form cysts. That's the basic thing. They are preservable because they form these cysts, and this starts in the Triassic. Another group which shows up then is the group of the coccolithophorids. Coccoliths. This is the group which becomes very, very important in the Cretaceous because they do form outer shells from carbonate minerals. So this is what the Cretaceous is all about. The Cretaceous shows very, very dominant sedimentation of these carbonaceous components produced by coccolithophorids. Damn, it's a mouthful to say. These show up, and diatoms show up. Diatoms having an outer shell made up, an outer shell made of siliceous materials. So, basically, glass. These groups, they then diversify over the Mesozoic, over the time of the dinosaurs. But there is this significant gap in between. We do have the advantage that, algae preserve well, their cysts preserve well, but what happened in the case of the phytoplankton blackout? Is this a case where there was actually... that something was actually missing, had gone extinct? Was this a time on Earth where everything worked differently? Or is this actually a case of something isn't preserved? And the case has been made for both ideas, that this is actually something genuine, that there is an extinction event in marine phytoplankton, photosynthesizing plankton, or that it's actually just a case of, something not preserving. And this is really, really cool. I mean, I'm mostly into vertebrate paleontology, as I've stated about 1,000 times by now. But this is pretty interesting because this is where I get excited when it's very, very difficult to tell whether there was a catastrophic event wiping out a very important group, or whether it's just a case of we just don't know they were there. Trying to figure that out really, really gets me excited. So the case for an actual extinction is that it was a time of change. In the latest Devonian and the Carboniferous, different continental plates collide to form what is known as Pangaea. Pangaea is something, once again, dinosaur fans might have heard about because it's the collision, it's the supercontinent existing at the beginning of the Triassic, at the beginning of the age of dinosaurs, which then once again breaks apart during the Mesozoic and leads to the picture we have today. So there are all kinds of things going on. Despite that, most of the time, while this phytoplankton blackout is going on, late Carboniferous, Permian into the Triassic, there are no more major collisions. You already have this supercontinent. Beforehand, maybe, shifting environmental factors, shifting ocean currents could have played a role, but after that, you have no major collisions and minimal spreading, ocean spreading likely. You only have one supercontinent, so in general, you have fewer subduction zones. You have less mantle exhalation, so you have less volcanism. The whole planet tends to be less active because you just don't have that many, you don't have as many continental edges as you used to have before. Which then once again leads to, in general, less shelf area. Plankton does tend to love the shelf area. Because for plankton, for phytoplankton to be a thing, you need nutrients. And you need lots of nutrients. And nutrients usually are transported into the oceans via rivers. Necessary nutritions come from the continents. And if you reduce your shelf area, you reduce the area where these nutrients can enter the shelf area. Then again, you have large basins on Pangaea. You have less edges where sediment can enter the oceans. You have less shelf area. This might have been a time where plankton didn't do too well because basic conditions weren't there. And, other things could have played into this. The next to shortening of coastlines, next to sediment catching on the continents themselves, nutrient depletion, because you could have had disruptions of equatorial circulations between Laurussia and Gondwana. So what we would today describe as Europe, Russia, and in the south, Africa, and few other continents, South America, which were all attached to one another in Gondwana. See, it was a time of potential stress. Yes, definitely. And this list goes on and on and on. These are just general factors which have been discussed in the past, which are known to have existed. And it can get way more complex than that. Way more. But, yeah, there is the other case, which is how the hell could marine ecosystems have existed without phytoplankton? And that's important to keep in mind here, because we know that marine ecosystems did exist. We have fossils of vertebrates, and we do know how marine ecosystems are usually functioning today. You need the basis of the food chain, which is phytoplankton, which produce the first organic material to be consumed. And if you have big vertebrates, which are preserved, if you have clams, brachiopods, all kinds of hard part creating organisms in your fossil record, it's pretty safe to say that phytoplankton has to have been there in some respect, because ecosystems wouldn't function without them. So, why the hell are these cysts missing? Why the hell is plankton missing? And there is a point that Permian cysts seem to be pretty small. So it's maybe not a case of it wasn't there, but a case of we just haven't seen it because it's difficult to see. And you would need a lot of, people working on this and a lot of time to find all these little planktonic cysts. There is also the possibility that potentially cyst formation was reduced because in today's cyst-forming dinoflagellates are actually the minority in their group. So dinoflagellates which form cysts in general, or which they don't form cysts in general, just 5 to 10% of them form cysts. They are known to do that. They are one of the prime examples for that. But actually only 5 to 10% of them do that, which we need to keep in mind.
Are these cysts like the only way that we can find them, or are there other things that fossilize too?
There are biomarkers, for example, so biochemical signatures, which are... I don't know whether you can use them for dinoflagellates, but for green algae, for instance, for different kinds of... I'm sorry, not algae, but for certain kinds of green bacteria and cyanobacteria, I know you can do it for them, but I would have to look that up.
Okay, so that just could have been there, but it didn't form any cysts, and so we have no way to see them.
Exactly.
Okay.
But then again, people have argued that this maybe again isn't the case because most forms which don't form cysts are the ones living in more open marine environments, so not really the direct shelf area. And acrotarchs tend to have a very high diversity in the outer shelf area, so we know that in the areas where dinoflagellates today usually do not form cysts on the outer shelf, acrotarchs did create cysts there. So dinoflagellates on the outer shelf today usually don't form cysts because they just have their whole entire life cycle freely in the water column itself. Acrotarchs are most diverse in just these areas, and they did form cysts all the time. So there is this discrepancy. It doesn't have to mean that there was no change of in the life cycle, that there was an abandoning of cyst-forming habits, but it's just one of those arguments made. So it's difficult. It's a back and forth.
Sounds like it. Yeah. Yeah, well, I just wanted to say it sounds like a back and forth.
Indeed, and that's what I say. It's a pretty complex topic. There has been the case has been made that maybe there was just a selective preservation against sporopollenin. So maybe ocean chemistry changed, and this is why we have fewer cysts preserved. But once again, there is a problem because we do have other no cysts. I think it was spores. Yeah, we have spores preserved in areas close to the continent. So the same material has been preserved. You can't really make the case that something different made from the same material isn't preserved then. If you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have spores made of sporopollenin. They are present. Acrotarch cysts made of the same material aren't, so this isn't really an argument.
Yeah.
Then once again, other groups could have taken over. Apart from, acritarchs. But this is once again maybe the weakest argument, because inferring that another group, totally unknown or at least behaving very differently than anything else, is always pretty difficult. It's at least something to keep in mind. And then again, we have to come back to basically the manpower or women power involved, because acritarchs are just poorly studied in the Carboniferous to Permian sediments, especially across the Devonian Carboniferous boundary. Acritarchs do already show a low diversity at the Devonian to Carboniferous, and maybe, in the Devonian, they do already show a low diversity, a gradual decrease. Was this probably a case of were they actually on their way out? And then on the other hand, you do have them popping up every now and again, which then once again could potentially lead to the question, did they change to another mode of life, and were these just residual groups which kept the cyst-forming habit or re-evolved it? And this is maybe to sum this up, because I think it's pretty difficult to follow. It's a back and forth between arguments. And what I find very, very fascinating in this case is you do have an extinction event. You do have some kind of an influence on planktonic groups. You do know that what was going in wasn't what was coming out the other end. There was a change. There was definitely something going on. But this is a case where we need to keep a lot of things in mind. We need to keep in mind, how well have sections been studied? How well observable are the subjects we are trying to study? We have to keep in mind, how did the world in general look back then? A lot of different things have to be discussed here. I don't know that there would be any kind of consensus right now. The case has been made for an actual extinction. In the end, we have to say the world couldn't have existed without plankton. Something must have been there. But a lot of different kinds of thoughts will still have to go into this.
What I was thinking about, and I don't know if a paper talked about that, but as far as I'm concerned, like phytoplankton is like one of the important producers of oxygen.
Yep.
So the impact on the atmosphere would have been also really large. But
yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's good that you mentioned that, because of course this would be another thing if phytoplankton took such a great hit. First of all, why are marine ecosystems seemingly still functioning and recovering? And why are terrestrial ecosystems still functioning? I mean, of course, I don't know how big of a hit it would have been for terrestrial ecosystems and how much it would have influenced oxygen production on Earth. And then again, I would have to know how much less oxygen compared to today would truly be a problem. Once again, many factors. I don't know, but yeah, it's at least an argument to be had.
Yeah, it's really complex. So many things are involved in that.
Yeah,
and also, the functional ecosystem you talked about. So this was like focused on what fossils is this like studied on? Do they look at snails or anything like that, or
So you mean the biodiversity of the megafauna?
Yeah.
It's just a general observation. So, I've read 2 papers which made the case the case for and against an actual plankton extinction. And they both, it's just stated it as a general fact, and it's well known that marine ecosystems worked at least more or less. I mean, of course, maybe someone is going to come out and tell me that it's complete, that there is actually some kind of non-working aspect about these ecosystems, but at least in general, I would say it's assumed that there was nothing majorly missing. I mean, all components you would expect are there, from little creatures to big creatures. Big fish eat little fish, all that.
And lots of fish. There's
lots of fish. lots of fish. Yeah, but maybe this is also a good point to get into the general discussion section, because we would still like to address why it is possible to make assumptions about Earth's past. We've now spent about 2.5-3 hours telling you why everything is patchy and why a lot of stuff is missing and why everything is pretty difficult, and oh man, I don't know. So we would like to assess this. Why exactly can we still figure out what the past on Earth must have looked like? Or on other planets.
Yeah.
For that matter.
When you talk now, I just have written a lot of stuff in my notebook, because there are so many thoughts I have on this paleontological part. I mean, and I don't have the numbers here, but if you look at the diversity of animals that we have today, I mean, we can just look at the diversity of insects that we have today. And then look at the past on the fossils we have. This is not comparable, right? Like, there had to be more. Just because there's... Yeah.
Insects are ludicrously diverse.
Yeah.
Just so you want to do a little question section before getting into the discussion? Did I get that right?
Oh, no, we can go into discussion. I think I can just
put
that into that.
Okay, I was a bit confused there, but yeah, no, it's... But that's the point. We need... we can just pretend that this was planned all along, and that it was already planned to be part of the discussion. I mean, we've touched on that a few times now, but it's important to look at the world today. Both in terms of, hey, what kinds of trends are truly necessary to support a planet in general, or in the paleontological case, an ecosystem on a global scale, and in what kinds of ways might Earth be different from the past as it is right now.
Yeah, for planetary science, it's also important, I mean, when you look at Earth, you always have to look at other planets, and if you look, for example, at Mars, you always have to look at Earth too, just because you need some comparison.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's a difficult thing. It's a sample size of one. The only terrestrial world we do truly, or not even truly, but we think we know pretty good is Earth. But then again, it's not just pretending everything we see right now is the norm. Going back to the point of, we need to figure out, it's a back and forth. Once again, it's a back and forth between how might we be special with the world as it is today, and how might we be the norm? What is the norm? And it's not
is
just...
Is there a norm at all?
Is there a norm at all? And what are we doing? We are looking at rock sections, and we are trying to figure... We use all of these little patches to try and get a coherent narrative out of that. So just to give a quick example from paleontology, we are trying to connect all these different dots. So let's say after dating rocks, we can figure out which ones are the oldest, which ones are the youngest. So you can try to find trends in these rocks in terms of the fossils which are contained in these rocks. Let's say you have rocks from the Cambrian, from the Permian, and from just before the Ice Age. What you would see is that you don't have any true terrestrial life. Well, it's debated whether there was absolutely nothing, but in general you wouldn't see any real animals, any plants, nothing in that regard. Maybe bacteria. In marine environments, this would already be different. The big explosion of animal diversity had happened. For the first time, animal life was a truly diverse thing, and all the basic groups we still know to this day were present. If you would then proceed to the Permian rocks, which are significantly younger, you would see, hey, all of a sudden there is life on land. And you would see that life in marine environments would have changed significantly. And if you then proceed to the youngest rocks just before the Ice Age, life would once again look very differently. But it's not just figuring out what lived when and what is present when, but you are then looking at, okay, how exactly do these animals differ from each other? How are they similar to one another? And so far, what paleontology has found is that there seems to be this evolutionary trend. Not seems to be, but we can pretty much say that there is this evolutionary development from certain forms into other forms. Today we can, confirm this via genetics, via the development of embryos, that there is a certain ancestry to all kinds of life. But you can also see that in fossils, for example. You do have development, you can see the development from some forms into new ones. The best example, or one of the best known examples, being from predatory dinosaurs into birds, as we know them today, which is pretty well documented.
I also think that the example that you talked about today, the phytoplankton blackout, kind of fits really nice into this, because it shows that we have no data from back then when it comes to these fossils, but there are other points that we can look at. As you said, we can look at the overall ecosystems that we have back then. We can look, as I kind of said, maybe on the atmosphere, and there had to be some sort of influence in the atmosphere. We can look at the plate tectonics from back then, and if we miss some data in the tree of evolution on some specific areas, then we can look at other points of the trees on different animals and see how kind of they evolved, and then we can do reasoning and to see, okay, somewhere in between these lines it should have happened.
Yeah, exactly. You can't just assume that because you don't really have that many deposits of a certain time, this time didn't happen. Something was going on. It's just looking at why it was different.
But, I mean, the phytoplankton blackout could also be explained like the phytoplankton just started to live in the air, like air plankton, and flew around in our atmosphere, but it's very unlikely. You could have explained it like that, but we have reasoning, and therefore we can say, nah, probably not.
Yeah, exactly. That's where basic reasoning comes back into play, because, of course, in theory, just in basic theory, maybe it could have been a thing, but we need to look at the way these creatures exist today, and today it just wouldn't be possible. Or at least it doesn't occur. And if you look at the rocks at marine sections from Earth's past, it looks like they had this mode of life for the entire time, ever since they popped up in the fossil record. Of course, we have talked about things maybe being missing we could never know about, but you have to be careful interpreting things. You can't just erect any kind of hypothesis and expect it to be accepted, because it needs to be within reason. I mean, you couldn't...
Yeah, exactly.
Another maybe bit stupid example, but dinosaurs all having been captured by aliens.
I like that one.
Yeah, I mean, it's... First of all, let's try to assess this on a serious note. Why would aliens have done that? That's the first thing.
Large zoo. Really large zoo.
Yeah. And then why the hell would they have left behind one group of dinosaurs, the birds? So, yeah, you're getting
many things, logistics and everything.
Yeah, it's just, why would they have done that, and why would they have left behind other things? Oh, we're an experiment. Let's just no longer. Let's just not keep discussing that. But yeah, that's basically what we mean is we are trying to go with the easiest explanation. And for example, the extinction of the dinosaurs has a simple explanation, or a simpler explanation, which has actual evidence behind it. And that's that, well, one day a mountain fell down on Earth. A 10-kilometer asteroid hit Earth, struck Earth. Maybe it was a comet, we don't really know that. But south of Mexico, in the Gulf of Mexico, there is about 200-kilometer in diameter crater dating back to that time.
This alien discussion just got me really thinking. I wrote down some new points, but I'm going to address it later. I mean, this is now on a bit different note, but I wanted to just first state in the paleontology because it's connected to that. We often have, for example, of dinosaurs, we just know one bone or two bones or a part of the head, and then we make reconstructions out of them. And an argument you often hear is, how is that possible? You just have one bone, you can't construct a dinosaur. And it's correct that we only can do this to a specific degree. But if we know all the other dinosaurs in the family and the dinosaurs dinosaurs that came after that, then we can make some assumptions. The dinosaur in the center probably wouldn't have involved, I don't know, a weird structure that later then never appeared again.
Yeah, exactly. You are looking at a bone you find, and you are trying your best to figure out which kind of animal it belonged to. And luckily, and that's often, I think, not stressed enough, we do have a pretty good idea what bones belong to which animal. I mean, of course, it can be pretty difficult, but I mean, it's narrowed down first because of the time we're in. So we do mostly have a rough idea what age a rock has we're working on. And by now, enough rock sections have been worked on to know what animals to expect and what animals not to expect. I mean, going back to the point that we do see a trend of certain creatures in certain aged rocks. This narrows it down already. We have never found an elephant in Cretaceous rocks. And the easiest explanation is that they didn't exist back then. We do know that mammals existed back then, but they were pretty small, and they were pretty different than everything that became after. And, well, then the dinosaurs go extinct, and what do you see in the rocks following that? Younger than that, you see that mammals become bigger and more diverse. Easiest explanation would be dinosaurs went extinct, and the mammals used the opportunity. But coming back to the single bone you find, the time, the exact age of the rock already narrows it down. The location might narrow it down because, especially in cases where you don't have a supercontinent, where you have different isolated continents, you might have a trend which animals existed where. Good example today would be the marsupials, which usually only exist in certain regions. And then we get into territory where we have narrowed it down sufficiently that, or either the bone already has certain structures we know only from a certain group, or you can at least narrow it down. And this goes as far as single bones having diagnostic features only certain animal groups have, no other animal groups have, and then once again, what's the easiest explanation? That there is this one odd, weird animal creature that has evolved all the structures of this other group, which is specifically known to have to only have these structures, or that it was an animal of that group. I go with the second. Just imagine how many different evolutionary steps it takes until a creature has become the way it is. Independent events, independent selective pressures to arrive at that point. And it's pretty unlikely that another creature, another living thing would go through all these exact steps leading to all these exact same structures. I mean, similar lifestyles can create very similar animals, but usually as soon as you get into the skeleton, you can immediately tell that they still come from two very different animal groups. One good example would be, just a very basic example would be that reptiles always have 3 bones in their lower jaw, while all mammals only have 1, for each side that is. For each side 3 or 1 each. Because mammals took 2 bones from their lower jaw and pulled them into the ear, making up the ear the way it is today. With 2 bones, I don't know the name in English, whether you would directly translate them, but it's Hammer and Amboss in German. So that's
our German words of the day.
Yeah, exactly. I thought it would be a nice occasion. I mean, it's a bonus word. Hammer und Amboss. So, hammer and anvil. I don't know whether you called it that in English. Yeah.
Yeah. And if we don't know what the animal is related to, we can reconstruct it as we think it could look like. Like, nobody's saying it has to look like that. But we can make like a likely assumption it probably looks like that, because if you, for example, have a Tyrannosaurus, Jesus, and T-Rex, or a T-Rex related animal, T-Rex related dinosaur, it probably wouldn't have evolved some sort of wings in between and just lost them again. So that wouldn't make any sense. And therefore you can make assumptions on how it looked like, but of course there can be differences that we don't know.
This also goes into genetics. I mean, if you have significantly reduced your arms, it's just less likely. I mean, it could happen, of course. You would certainly require a very specific amount of selective pressures, but it's difficult to back out of this spot, or more difficult, at least more difficult than if you already had perfect wings or perfectly long arms with feathers on them, like many raptors had. Get over it, people. But this is just a thing. I mean, we're getting a lot into paleontological stuff, but this is where many people, or we're not many people, but this is where I get angry at times, because when I hear about things like, how do you know that? It could just have been some kind of another animal. Maybe it just evolved a bone that looks like other bones. And this is what I'm trying to get across, that this trend, for instance, with...
That's also general in science.
Yeah, exactly.
Just as, how can you know that?
Exactly, and just to get back to that lower jaw bones example, we see this in all reptiles. From the dawn of reptilehood to this day, reptiles show this feature. Mammals show this feature, and we even see in, once again, rocks, in a rock section, we see that mammals towards younger rocks tend to reduce these two bones in their lower jaw. Towards true mammals, you see a reduction of these bones, and you see them slowly being incorporated into the inner ear. I don't know about that last part. I don't know about their incorporation, how well that's documented, but I think it is. You see this reduction, and you see these two bones becoming part of the ear, and you can still see that in embryonic development to this day, I think. I would like to get away from this, because I would still like to hear a bit more about the planetary science side of things.
And in planetary science, and I talked a lot about it the last time, first of all, planetary science, you have to talk about a broader spectrum, because you not only talk about geology here or paleontology, but you have to talk about geophysics, geochemistry. There are many things that will come together here. And I would like to go with the statement that you said, that like this question, then how can you even know that? And well, the good thing here is that we have many different methods where we can look at that. If you, for example, ask the question, how does our planet look in the core? How does its core look like? How is it built up? Then we can look at seismic data. We can look at earthquake data. We can look at chemistry. We can look even at meteorites. We can then make models from that, because what we've learned now from meteorites, planets, and seismic data, we can look at the mineralogy, and with that, or even the our magnetosphere, the magnetic field of the Earth, we can also look at that. We can look at the gravity. There are so many things that we can now look in, and then all of this combined gets us to where we are now. And this is a kind of actually precise map of the inner Earth. I mean, for sure it's generalized, but it is well understood now on large scale. And this also is the case for any other planet, or our moon, or other moons, every terrestrial planet. And this is what I want to stretch in planetary sciences. And this is just, if you don't have the data for that, go stress. Yeah, I said stress.
Yeah.
Stress. If you don't have the data for that, just look somewhere else. Try to think, all right, if I don't know it there, then where can I go and study it? On the moon or on Mars, what is often done is you see there a feature, you don't know it, and then you see, oh, it's also on Earth, or a feature that looks similar, so let's study it here on Earth, because here we are able to do that.
Yeah, Spitzbergen comes to my mind.
Yeah. So on Mars, there are these circles, these stone circles. These are just beautiful circles made from larger stones than the surrounding material. And nobody knew where they come from. But we can find them on Earth. They are, for example, in Spitzbergen, as you said. And also on other areas, as far as I know. And since we have them on Mars and we have them on Earth too, we can look at them on Earth and then try to extrapolate, well, then how do they form on Mars? This was also done with impact craters, for example. Because for a very long part of our history, we didn't know. When I started talking about planetary sciences, you said that, you look on the moon, there are a lot of impact craters. But since the 1960s or even 1970s, this was still highly discussed. Nobody knows if this was volcanoes or impact craters. So we looked because, nobody was there before. We had no satellites there. Nobody landed there. So we didn't know that. We looked then on Earth and looked at volcanoes here on Earth and impact craters on Earth and then make assumptions. What can we learn from that? But we can look even farther. If you then talk about the formation of our solar system, we kind of had ideas, we kind of had models that we think how this should have worked. There's a lot of physics and a lot of chemistry involved now, and we kind of built models and thought about maybe it should work something like that, so that with a protoplanetary disk around our early forming sun, and in this protoplanetary disk then the planets formed. Then we looked at meteorites, at the chemistry of meteorites, and we find evidence of these processes that we thought there should have been. Also, we found, many signs or many clues for processes that, happened in this solar nebula. And then, with the help of space telescopes, we are suddenly able to see these protoplanetary nebulas in different stages. From no planets at all to, it seems like the first planets are evolving, to, it seems like all the planets are already involved or evolved, but the formation is still going on. And we see all these stages now with our space telescopes and different suns, or different stars around our solar system. Different stars in our galaxy. We are now able to look at these things.
Damn it.
And then, again, with that help, study our history.
Yeah, and that's it. I mean, once again, we keep mentioning that, but it's always about looking at other examples, which luckily there are plenty of, and then trying to figure out our own place in all of this.
Yeah, it's just, if you have no data, go and look somewhere else, and you may be able to find evidence there.
Yeah, it's always interesting that you do even, I mean, for instance, most planets are very different from Earth, but then again, it often amazes me that you can actually, despite all these obvious differences, you can find things down here which are being found on Mars, for instance, like the rock circles, boulder circles.
Yeah, rock
boulder circles.
Stone circles.
Yeah, it amazes me that it's even present on Earth, and that your professor takes the risk of a polar bear attack to study it.
To go there.
Yeah, and it's... No, but in all seriousness, that's essentially what we're doing in geology. Trying to connect the dots, which, hey, so far it's working pretty well, because many things fall neatly in line, and it's not just that everybody just agrees on everything. No, I mean, especially in detail, there are things that are being discussed all the time. But overall, it seems that, well, people researching this stuff can agree on a certain chain of events. And this is what we are trying to convey, that this is not people just being convinced that one idea is the correct one, but it's testing and testing and testing and going through all different arguments to try and figure out what is the truth in all of this.
Yeah. This back and forth we talked about, this is really important in this case, because with this back and forth, we kind of, often we find ourselves in the middle, but in the center, but often also it's just one side wins, or wins in apostrophes.
Yeah,
but
yeah. It's just it has this more convincing argument, for example.
Yeah.
It's
not like scientists just, look at a rock and are like, yeah, we don't have data, we don't know what happened there, but it has to be something like that.
Exactly.
We're going through many different methods to then find a solution that seems to be the most likely.
Yeah, and especially today, where, I often like to think that right now we have entered an age where science, kind of has grown up. It matures, I think, because more and more people become way more skeptical. This is something I often tend to think about, because even some decades back, people often, presented theories which didn't really have the best evidence. They weren't really too much based on evidence, more on speculation, not meaning that there was no evidence or that it wasn't reasonable, but I think that we do see this trend towards people becoming more skeptic and people wishing for more precise and more striking arguments before having a theory presented to them.
And hopefully this will continue.
Yeah, hopefully. That's the thing. At the core of science, there is skepticism, questioning everything. But, of course, in pure theory, it could be that we've got it all wrong. In pure theory, but, that is going back to reasoning. If we can prove something again and again and again, if again and again and again, I can go back to the Cretaceous and again and again and again find dinosaur bones there, but never again in younger rocks except for birds. Yeah, likely we're onto something. Likely something happened.
Yeah,
or maybe just dinosaurs stopped forming bones for some time. Which, no.
They're still here. They're just leaving deep nose.
Which is, I hope that by now it's clear this is not the case. All right. Would you like to add something?
I have still many points, but I can also discuss this in another podcast.
Yeah.
We've already talked about a lot today.
I don't know. If you still have something worthy of mentioning, of course.
Maybe one point for my last statement I want to do here is, for science, it is important to first of all look at different points, at different ways, different methods, as I said before. And then it's also important to and this is really important, to discuss all these things together. Because this is the important part in my eyes that often differentiates conspiracy theories from science, where conspiracy theories then take all the results and try to imagine the most spectacular reason for all of that. The large conspiracy behind all of it. And science would search for the most likely scenario. And also then searched for like all other work that kinda maybe have influenced our results to try to get a conclusion that makes sense. And while conspiracy theories then often you're kind of spectacular. And I would never forget this one example. And, you know, there are these UFO alien quotes, documentary quotes.
Yeah.
And
aliens.
At this one part, they were like, yeah, and then in the night, then 4 children-sized creatures were in the garden, and they hold something that, well, it kind of looked like flashlights, kind of looked like laser pointer with different colors, and they switched it off and on and off and on and off. And then they argued it could be aliens, but I mean, maybe, just maybe, you know, these were 4 children's with laser pointers. I don't know, just pointing that out. And this is like, try to then reasonable discuss this all and came to a conclusion that makes sense in the larger picture.
So you've made a beautiful final point, and I have the feeling that I cannot really bring my final thoughts across here. No, it's a delicate process. It's a complicated process. And it's easy to just assume things and just to think something up, but it's something...
You need proof for everything.
Yeah, and just think about the hundreds and thousands of people all over the world working on this. By now we have entered an age where you just can't know everything. You cannot even know everything about every planet. You cannot even know everything about... You could mainly focus on tectonics, and I would guarantee you couldn't know everything about tectonics that is known by now. No, fields have become very broad, and interaction between fields has become very important, and we're doing our best. I mean, we're not. We have just started our career, so no time to get grandiose here, but we're hoping to play our part in this.
I think I will never forget when I was in an exercise in university that we had to do with our lecturer in... He's more of an chemical... Or, no, not chemical, but more of a physicist. And physicist, right? And he studies the inner Earth. Also the minerals of inner Earth, Jesus. But just in general, the inner Earth. And he took a stone and put it like in front of my face, and he was like, "Yeah, what is this?" And I thought this was a test. So I thought really long, and I'm like, I'm not really sure. It could be that. And I just looked at him and waiting the answer, and he's like, "Yeah, I don't know. You're the geologist. I have absolutely no clue. I just wanted to know what this work is."
Yeah, which goes to show it's so many people are working on this, and everybody is trying to bring his own strength in. So I think that's really, now that's a good note to end on.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
For real.
Yeah, for real this time, because we've been going for a long time once again. But I think this discussion was really fun.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun.
Yeah, kind of fun.
And yeah, kind of fun for that. Yeah. With that, I think this concludes our 3rd episode.
Hey.
Yeah.
So then, bye guys.
Bye, and have a nice evening or a nice day. Thanks for listening to the RockyTerrain Podcast. If you enjoyed listening to us, please consider subscribing on your favorite podcast platform.
Everything addressed in this podcast reflects our own opinion. You can contact us at 4.5GAinthemaking@gmail.com. That is 4.5GAinthemaking@gmail.com. All music used is from Kevin MacLeod and was downloaded from filmmusic.io under the Creative Commons license. That is heavy interlude for intro and outro, and home bass groove for intermission.
So,
Yeah. Okay, so
okay, awkward break.
I was drinking.